We're here because free speech is under attack. We're here because people are being convinced that socialism works. We're here because people are being judged guilty until proven innocent. We are fighting back with facts. This is not a safe zone, so buckle up, Buttercup. This is the raw, naked truth.
A second attempt to assassinate Donald Trump. Putin has strong words for NATO. Polaris Dawn returns home, and more. Welcome to the Raw Naked Truth. I'm your host, Eric Lopkin, and here's the news you need to know. Donald Trump was the target of a second apparent assassination attempt Sunday when Secret Service agents opened fire on a gunman at his golf club in West Palm Beach, Florida, where the former president was golfing just a few holes away. Trump was unhurt and the suspect fled, but was arrested shortly after. At least one agent, who was 1 or 2 holes ahead of Trump on the course, fired after spotting the man pointing a rifle through a fence, law enforcement officials said. A witness saw the man dart out of a business and take off in a black Nissan, which helped sheriff's deputies track and stop him while he was headed down I-95. The man, whom law enforcement officials familiar with the investigation identified as Ryan Wesley Ruth, born in 1966, was detained and is facing criminal charges. Investigators said they didn't know if the gunman himself fired a shot during the encounter. SpaceX's Polaris Dawn crew is home, capping off a 5-day mission to orbit, which included the world's first commercial spacewalk by splashing down in the Gulf of Mexico. The Crew Dragon capsule, carrying 4 astronauts, landed off the coast of Dry Tortugas, Florida at 3:37 a.m. Eastern Time Sunday. The Polaris Dawn mission made history as it reached a higher altitude than any human has traveled in 5 decades. A spacewalk conducted early Thursday morning also marked the first time such an endeavor has been completed by a privately funded and operated mission. One of the crew members FaceTimed her family from space using Starlink. Russian President Vladimir Putin this week issued an ominous warning against the U.S. and its NATO allies and said they risk being at war with Moscow if Ukraine is allowed to use long-range missiles to hit targets inside Russia. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has been pushing the U.S. and NATO for months to remove any and all restrictions they have on Kiev's use of Western-supplied long-range weapons and permit it to hit military targets deep in Russia. But Putin on Thursday drew a red line and said this will mean that NATO countries, the U.S., and European countries are at war with Russia. The Israel Defense Forces on Thursday said its troop had dismantled Hamas's Rafah brigade on the Philadelphia corridor as they look to eliminate cross-border tunnels into Egypt. In a press release, the IDF said its troops in the 162nd Division had conducted precise intelligence-based, targeted operations in the Rafah area over the last few months and eliminated over 2,000 terrorists. Israeli forces destroyed a reported 8 miles of underground routes and have neutralized roughly 80% of all Hamas's tunnels on the strategic security corridor, which runs alongside the border with Egypt. Harrowing new video released by the IDF shows the conditions of the tunnels in which the troops found 6 hostages who had been executed by Hamas terrorists last month. We have also distributed this footage in English, and I have briefed the international media so that the whole world can see and remember the evil of Hamas and understand the cruelty with which it treats its hostages, IDF spokesperson Radam Daniel Hagari said at a briefing earlier this week. Even at this moment, our hearts are first and foremost with the families of the hostages, and we share in their immense grief and sorrow, Hagari added. We continue and will continue to exert every effort every effort to bring the hostages home alive and as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, Sunday, the Iranian-backed Houthis fired a long-range missile from Yemen into central Israel for the first time. The Israeli Defense Forces successfully intercepted the missile, preventing direct injuries. Still, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the terrorists should have known by now that we exact a heavy price for any attempt to harm us. New York City will soon be the largest city in the U.S. to enact a reparations program. Council members Crystal Hudson and Farrah Lewis sponsored a pair of bills to establish a Truth, Healing, and Reconciliation Commission and a reparations task force. Both bills passed on Thursday and will be effective immediately. The New York City Council voted to pass legislation establishing municipal efforts to acknowledge and address the legacy and impact of slavery and racial injustices in New York City, the New York City Council announced in a press release. The package of legislation would establish a truth, healing, and reconciliation process on slavery within New York City, which had one of the highest rates of slave ownership in the country in the 1700s. A reparations study in informational signs at the city's first slave market, and a task force to consider the creation of a freedom trail commemorating abolitionist movement and Underground Railroad sites. That's the Raw Naked Truth. You can catch every episode of The Raw Naked Truth at xvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and other platforms that respect freedom of speech. We'll see you next time.